Hey, Shalom, Israel. Yahweh Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai Barakathon. To the brothers watching, Yahweh Shemalathon Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai. To the sisters watching, this is the ISUPK started out of 1 West, 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commanding General Yohana. And we teach the truth concerning the Bible, that so-called blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians are descendant of the greatest people to ever walk the face of this earth. The 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. You're tuned in with Precinct Officer 500, Howard Moore, ISUPK, Kentucky. And tonight is our Monday night history class. Now, before we get into it, I want to invite every so-called Black, Hispanic, and North American Indian watching to tune into our weekly content, because the content do be content. You feel me? So Monday night, of course, our history class, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Tuesday night, Brotherhood class taught by Officer of 1,000, I'm a Wonga Bar. Wednesday law class taught by Officer of 1,000, ISUPK. And Wednesday night, the Kentucky podcast, Cry Out, Spare Not podcast, hosted by Officers of 1,000, I'm a Wonga Bar, and ISUPK. And come here, the biblical breakdown, the biblical solution to all of the viral videos going across the internet. But tonight's topic, you see it, we finna get into this so-called men's liberation movement. Now, you might not have heard it been referred to this way, because this is the historical name for it, and this is a history class. But we finna get into what people call today the red pill movement. All right, the red pill movement. You might have heard somebody say high value men or whatever. We finna get into the history of this movement tonight. And we finna lay it down flat. We finna lay it down about as flat as you can lay it. Now, it took me a minute to take a little deep dive into it, because I don't know nothing about these folks. All right. I don't know nothing about these people. All right. I never watched them. So it took me about 20 minutes to take a deep dive into it. And you know what these people are about. I've been hearing about them online lately. People like Myron Gaines, people like David Cooley, right? And again, I don't know nothing about these folks, but we finna get into it tonight. We finna get into the history of this movement, where it comes from. All right. And like I said, we finna lay it down nice and flat. All right. ISUPK, Kentucky, Monday night history class under Commanding General Yohana. Let's go ahead and get it. All right. Again, topic of tonight's class is the red pill, the history of the men's liberation movement and the influence of counterculture. All right, like I said, you might have heard it being called the red pill, the manosphere. You dig what I'm saying? High value men, whatever. But we're finna get into the history of these folks tonight. And it all comes from something called the men's rights movement. All right, the men's rights movement and the manosphere. The term red pill is used as a metaphor for the specific moment when a person comes to believe that certain gender roles they are expected to conform to, such as marriage, are intended to benefit women alone. So right away, we have these people on these platforms that's making themselves out to be the victim already. So right here at the beginning, we got the men's rights movement, the manosphere, red pill, etc. These people are making themselves out to be the victim off the jump. Let's walk. All right, the term red pill comes from the movie The Matrix. It symbolizes the idea of choosing the harsh truth over uncomfortable illusion. So again, they riding the wave. They riding the wave of a movie called The Matrix. And if you're not familiar, The Matrix, the movie The Matrix was written by a black woman. And then you have these people all day long that talk shit about black women. All right, make that make sense. Let's walk. All right, in this context, taking the red pill signifies rejecting what they view as mainstream narratives about gender equality and embracing a perspective that they believe reveals the supposed dominance of women and the victimization of men in society. Again, these people are making themselves out to be the victim. All right. Maybe they were victimized at some point. Now, when I first started paying attention to these podcasters or whatever, I said to myself, they talk like they were the type of kids that used to get shoved in their locker back when they was in school. All right. And now they done, since they was Steve Urkel in high school, they done got a little bread about them and turned into damn tricks. Right? Messing the game up. But again, reveals the supposed dominance of women and the victimization of men in society. And of course, I get everything sourced up. We're going to start with David Cooley. Again, I don't know nothing about this guy, but I just been hearing about this so-called culture war and the so-called beef between men and women. And we're going to get back into the origin. Once I lay out the key players in it right now, we finna get into the origin of it. So this is David Cooley with his YT woman. You did. Now, David Cooley, host of No Fugazi podcast, is known for scorching women who are single mothers and advising men to never date them. All right. Known for talking shit about women who are single mothers and advising men to never date them. But he's dating a YT woman that just happens to be a single mother of two. All right, this man is dating a YT woman with 2 baby daddies, you dig, and advising men never to date them. All right, this is a hypocrite. But we're talking about the key players in this movement right now, and we finna break into the history of it. Let's walk. All right, Andrew Tate. You might have heard this man Andrew Tate before. All right, Andrew Tate is an American and British social media personality. He gained popularity for promoting various positions in the manosphere community. He is politically described as far right. Now, we're going to get into a couple of themes tonight, a couple of themes in this men's movement, a couple of themes in this manosphere agenda. You're going to see 2 main themes in it. You're going to see white supremacy, and you're going to see reference to the counterculture of the 60s and 70s. All right, you're going to see 2 themes that's going to run through this thing, and the 2 things are going to be white supremacy, far right, alt-right, all right, white nationalism, and you're going to see the counterculture of the 60s and the 70s. Let's walk. All right, in August, Romanian police raided 4 properties Tate owns and expanded its investigation to include trafficking of minors. All right, essaying of a minor, money laundering, and attempting to influence a witness. All right, so if all of these things turn out to be true, all right, this is obviously not the kind of person that we should be taking advice from. All right, especially people. I've been hearing people say crazy things like the average man ain't had sex in a year. I'm trying to figure out what kind of men call these podcasts and ask for advice. All right, so this is obviously not the kind of people you want to take advice from. Let's walk. All right, now it says that Andrew Tate is known for being far right politically. Well, what does that mean? All right, alt-right is a name currently embraced by some white supremacists and white nationalists to refer to themselves and the ideology which emphasizes preserving and protecting the white race in the United States. Now, if you notice so far, David Cooley's a brother and Andrew Tate's a brother. So why would they be pushing white supremacist ideologies? All right, a loose association of a relatively young white nationalists who celebrate a white identity and lament the alleged erosion of white political and economic power and the decline of white culture in the face of non-white immigration and multiculturalism. Now, ain't that funny? Because Andrew Tate is an immigrant. Andrew Tate is a non-white immigrant. It says the decline of white culture in the face of non-white immigration and multiculturalism, white supremacists, and extreme libertarians. Now you might be thinking, how could a black person be a white supremacist? Well, you might have forgot. You might have forgot a little while back, there was an organization called the Proud Boys. And the Proud Boys was led by a brother named Enrique Tarrio. All right, again, another non-white immigrant. He was from Cuba. So these people, these white nationalists, they supposedly fear non-white immigration, but the people that are pushing and putting the cape on for these white supremacists are non-white immigrants. All right, the Proud Boys is a North American far-right organization. Again, you're going to see two main themes in this men's movement. You're going to see white supremacy, and you're going to see the counterculture of the 60s and 70s. All right, here goes your Proud Boys. All right, Trump or death. And this hand sign right here, if you're not familiar, that's the white power hand sign. That's the white power hand sign. Proud Boy. All right. And this is part of the ideology that's in this manosphere or in this red pill movement. Let's walk. All right. Myron Gaines. Look at this funky African right here. Look at this musty toupee wearing, Ebola finger waving, goosey soup eating African. All right. Known for the Fresh and Fit podcast. All right, I don't even know what that means. I guess he's fit enough to lift the fly swatter, to knock the flies off of him, unlike the people in his own homeland. But again, the Fresh and Fit podcast started in 2020 as a part of the men's rights movement. All right, it was founded by Myron Gaines, author of Why Women Deserve Less. All right, again, this men's rights movement. All right, Gaines was born Amarul, I'm not even finna pronounce that shit. All right, you got to have a mouthful of fufu to even pronounce this. All right, has a Sudanese heritage on his paternal side. So he is a funky African foreigner, right, that comes to America, all right, changes his name, I guess, to try to fit in or whatever, all right, and again, tries to put this cape on for white supremacy. But I got him here. All right, Myron Gaines, the host of the Fresh and Fit podcast, and #1 best-selling author and real estate investor. Prior to entrepreneurship, Gaines was a special agent with Homeland Security investigations at the Laredo, Texas office. All right, this man was a special agent with Homeland Security. Oh, we finna walk these folks down today. All right, the men's rights movement. Now let's get into the history of it. We talked about the major players right now. Let's get into the history and where it started from. Again, this is a history class, ISUPK Kentucky Monday history class. The men's rights movement focuses on social issues such as specific government services, which adversely impact or in some cases structurally discriminate against men and boys. So now we're talking about people that belong to the so-called patriarchy that are complaining about being discriminated against. All right. You have these people, white supremacists mainly, that have what they call a victim pyramid, right? Where they try to say the biggest whiners and complainers at the top of the pyramid, right? And white straight Christian males are at the bottom. But this is just a way for these people to put themselves at the top of their own pyramid that they created. All right. This is a movement that's trying to push straight white Christian males as the ultimate victim. All right. Common topics discussed within the men's rights movement include family law, child custody, alimony, marital property distribution, reproduction, suicide, domestic violence against men, false accusations of rape, education, social safety nets, and health policies. All right. All of this is going to come out of these so-called liberation movements of the 1960s and the 1970s. All right. A liberation movement is a political or social movement that aims to establish an independent state for a nation or to fight against colonial power or national government. Now, in this particular case, these people believe that their own government is discriminating against them because they're so-called straight white Christian males. All right, examples of liberation movements include the 70s liberation movement, the Black Panther Party, we're going to talk about them later, Black Lives Matter, we're going to touch on them too, Black liberation theology, women's liberation movement, and the men's liberation movement. Let's walk. All right, this is an old protest sign. You can see how soft this looks. All right, men's liberation, men are more than success objects. I guess this is a clap back at women saying they're more than sexual objects. You got men actually saying we're more than success objects. This is about the softest thing I think I've ever seen before. All right, the men's rights movement branched off from the men's liberation movement back in the early 70s and is described as a backlash against feminism. All right, this isn't even traditional or natural masculinity. All right, this is nothing but a defense mechanism and a response to feminism. This isn't real masculinity. This isn't real masculinity. These are people that's trying to argue back and forth with feminists. All right, people trying to argue back and forth with feminists. All right, the men's liberation movement stresses the negative aspects of traditional masculinity, whereas the men's rights movement is largely about perceived unequal or unfair treatment of men by modern institutions because of or in spite of those traits ubiquitous to traditional masculinity. These people, what they're saying is traditional masculinity, all right, real masculinity, all right, is not something they're trying to do. All right, it says the movement is largely about perceived unequal or unfair treatment of men by modern institutions. All right, again, making men out to be the victim. All right, well, I thought there was supposed to be this big patriarchy. How were men the victim? You dig? So again, the men's liberation movement stresses the negative aspects of traditional masculinity. All right, because masculine men aren't finna get online and argue back and forth with feminists all day. That's just not finna happen. All right, masculine men are not finna sit on a podcast and argue with feminists all day long. All right, it stresses the negative aspects of traditional masculinity. So these people view actual masculinity as negative. All right, the men's liberation movement additionally aims to liberate men from stereotypes and attitudes that prevent them from expressing their emotions in a healthy manner. Must be why they sound so bitch made on these damn podcasts. You dig what I'm saying? They aim to liberate men from the stereotypes that prevent them from expressing their emotions in a healthy manner. That's why all these men look like they're in touch with their feminine side. All right, the men's liberation movement started mostly among heterosexual, middle-class men in North America as a response to the cultural changes of the 60s and 70s, including the growth of the feminist movement, counterculture, we finna get into counterculture later, women's and gay liberation movements, and the sexual liberation. All right, all these things come out at the same time. All right, the movement led to the formation of conferences, consciousness raising groups. Now it's also talking about, we're going to get into what's called Black liberation theology. We're going to get into what's called the conscious community, because all of this comes out of this time period. All right, men's centers and other resources across the United States. All right, racial differences have existed within the men's liberation movement, which despite its best efforts of inclusion, such divisions have on occasion been problematic. Some scholars in opposition to the movement have argued that racism within American society has emasculated non-white men. For example, and this is what these folks believe, it says Black men are perceived to lack control over sexual aggression. Within this ideological framework, Black men are presented as hypersexual to an animalistic degree and are compared to animals, predators, and beasts because of this. Well, it seems like the YT men that started this movement sound like they're a little bit jealous to me. It sounds like these weak, soft, in touch with their feminine side, YT men sound a little bit jealous to me. All right, these men sound rather small to me. You dig what I'm saying? Let's walk. All right, the men's liberation movement paid increased attention to issues of sexuality, particularly the relationship between homosexual men and masculinity. This shift led more to cooperation between the men's liberation and gay liberation movements. Again, it's no wonder why you have people like the late Kevin Samuels, who was also a part of this movement, how you had people always try to say that he was homosexual. All right, because again, this early men's liberation movement, the origin of the modern manosphere, all right, at one time led to cooperation between the men's liberation movement and the gay liberation movement. Again, it's no wonder these people seem so soft today. All right, again, why would you sit on a podcast and argue all day long with a feminist? All right, I ain't finna do it. I ain't finna do it. That's just real talk. In part, this cooperation arose because masculinity was then understood to be a social construct, and as a response to the universalization of men seen in the previous men's movement. So these people are saying that masculinity is a construct. Shalom, Lord Christ, sir. These people are saying that masculinity is a construct. All right, it's no wonder you have people that's bugged out their mind today talking about gender is a social construct. You had people back then in these men's movements. All right, again, the parent movement for the modern manosphere, for these red pill movements, for these so-called high value men. All right, the origin of their movement was talking about masculinity is a social construct. All right, masculinity is a social construct. There's no wonder you had people today trying to say that gender is a social construct. But we just read earlier how they had cooperation between these early men's movements and the gay liberation movement. Let's walk. All right, the manosphere is a collection of websites, blogs, and online forums promoting masculinity in opposition to feminism. Again, this isn't masculinity. All it is a response to the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s. All right, communities within the manosphere include men's rights activists, incels, we're going to talk about them in a minute, men going their own way, and fathers' rights groups. And here they go, looking soft as ever, looking like they're completely in touch with their feminine side. All right, the manosphere overlaps with far right and alt-right communities. Like I said, we're going to see two main themes in this men's movement. We're going to see white supremacy, alt-right, far right, white nationalism, and we're going to see the counterculture of the 60s and 70s. All right, men going their own way as an anti-feminist, mostly online community, advocated for men to separate themselves from women and society, which they believe have been corrupted by feminism. Now, didn't we just hear recently when Kamala Connect the Dots Harris lost the election, we heard women talking about a 4B movement, where they were going to separate themselves from men in society. Well, you got men over here doing the same thing. And again, it's nothing but a response to feminism. All right, the community is a part of the manosphere, a collection of anti-feminist websites, online communities that include the men's rights movements, incels, we're going to talk about them, and pickup artists. All right, like other manosphere communities, the men going their own way overlaps the neo-reactionary alt-right movement. Again, two themes we're going to see in this. All right, white supremacy, white nationalism, and the counterculture of the 60s and 70s. All right, men going their own way in other manosphere communities overlap with the reactionary white nationalists, alt-right, and other white supremacist movements worldwide. All right, men going their own way endorse the belief shared by other manosphere groups that women follow a similar pattern in dating and marriage. Young and attractive women are promiscuous, engaged in hypergamy, having sex with numerous men, and abandoning a man if a higher value man shows interest. This is where this term high value comes from. All right. I'm here to tell you, look, if you can't check a bitch, if you can't lock a bitch down, that's your problem. All right. If you can't lock a bitch down, there's something wrong with you. But again, this is nothing but a response to feminism. But this is where this high value man shit comes from. So lock it for my language. This is where this high value nonsense comes from. All right. To believe women gravitate toward alpha men, all right, this is where this term comes from, who are attractive but mistreat them, reinforcing the ideology of feminism. This is where this alpha man nonsense comes from. Look, men, we don't sit around calling ourselves alphas all the goddamn time. All right, there's no need to. There's no need to. If you have to call yourself an alpha man, you might be suspect. You might be in touch with your feminine side. Your fathers and grandfathers might have been involved in trying to merge the men's movement with the gay liberation movement, like we just read. All right, those in the manosphere who have been awakened from the feminist delusion to the supposed reality that society is fundamentally misandrous and dominated by feminist values are said to have taken the red pill. Those who did not accept that ideology are referred to as blue pill. All right, and again, everything I'm saying here tonight is sourced up. All right, everything I'm saying here tonight is sourced up. So these people actually believe that we live in a female-dominated society. A female-dominated society. Well, women haven't even had the right to vote for very long. Well, women couldn't even get a credit card without the permission of their husbands until the 70s or the 80s? But we supposedly live in a female-dominated society. All right, these people are sick. These people are sick. And again, these ain't the people that be taking advice from. All right, again, these people are soft. These people are the type that got shoved in their lockers at school, got their lunch money taken away. This is where these people come from. But they come up on a little money, get a little podcast, you dig, and now they want to give us advice. All right, other jargon includes the pejorative terms of other men, such as beta. All right, this is where the term beta male comes from. You hear this in these circles all the time. But again, if you got to walk around calling yourself an alpha, you might be suspect. You might be suspect. All right, incel, involuntary celibate. Let's talk about this real quick. Is associated with an online counterculture. There goes that word again. Again, like I said, we're going to see two themes tonight in these men's liberation movements, in these movements that say that we live in a female-dominated society. You're going to see two themes in it: white supremacy and the influence of counterculture. All right, it says involuntary celibate, associated with the online counterculture of people, mostly white males who consider themselves unable to attract women sexually, typically associated with views that are hostile towards women. And this is why these people have such anger and such vitriol for women online. All right, this is why they sit up and talk shit about women online all day long. All right, again, like I said, if you have a problem getting women, if you're having problems locking a woman down, all right, that's your problem. All right, you might want to get around the ISUPK, the Commander General Yohana. You might want to start learning from some real men where you can learn how to lock a woman down, where you can learn how to be attractive to the opposite sex, instead of getting online and talking shit about women all day long. All right, these attitudes can be characterized by resentment, hostility, misogyny, self-pity, racism, sense of entitlement, blaming of women, and rape culture. All right, incel communities became more extremist and focused on violence from the late 2010s. This has been attributed to factors including influences from overlapping online hate groups, The rise of alt-right and white supremacist groups. Again, I'm going to keep repeating that there's two main themes dealing with this men's movement. There's two main themes dealing with the red pill, dealing with the manosphere, dealing with these so-called high-value men, dealing with the men's liberation movement. And these two main themes are white supremacy, and the influence of the counterculture in the 1960s and 1970s. Let's walk. All right, so where does all this come from? All right, where did all this men's liberation movement come from? All right, who started this so-called red pill, high-value man movement? All right, this man right here, ISUPK. Now it looks like he ain't had a woman in 30 years. It looks like he ain't had a woman in 30 years. And he's the father of this so-called red pill movement, of this so-called manosphere, modern manosphere movement that used to be called the men's liberation movement. Let's read about it. All right, 1978, ISUPK wrote an essay called "Who Gets Screwed in a Divorce? I Do," which was published in Playboy. Now, you see, like I said, it looked like he ain't had a woman in about 20, 30 years. All right, sits around with Playboy magazines and complains about how his wife left him. Well, again, if you don't know how to lock a woman down, that's your fault. All right, that's your problem. All right, the essay was so popular that Baby joined the longtime Playboy editor, Arthur Ketchmer, to develop a column called Men that became the celebrated cornerstone of the men's liberation movement. All right, this is where all of this manosphere talk comes from. This is where all of this high-value talk comes from. From a man whose wife left him, took everything, and now he's got to sit around goddamn Playboy magazines all the goddamn time because he can't attract a damn woman. Well, again, these might not be the men you want to take advice from. All right, so you might want to get around some brothers in the UPK under Commander General Yohana. It will teach you how to lock a woman down. Hell, maybe even 2 or 3. All right, maybe even 2 or 3. But this is the cornerstone of the men's liberation movement. He participated in several covert actions in Laos. Now, what does covert mean? What does covert mean? Let's talk about it. He participated in several covert actions in Laos. His military experience became material for several essays and finally his first book, Land of a Million Elephants. Well, let's find out what his covert actions were in Laos during the Vietnam conflict. All right, he rode with a group called the Ravens. All right, that were involved in these covert missions to Laos during the Vietnam conflict. It says the Ravens were forward air controllers who worked with who? The CIA to identify targets in Laos during the Vietnam War. All right. The founder of these men's movements, the founder of what's known as the manosphere today, high-value men today, red pill today, whatever you want to call it, it all comes out of the men's liberation movement. And their founder worked with the CIA. Now, see, now it's making more sense. All right, these people, we know the CIA is responsible. We know the CIA is responsible for starting wars. Well, they absolutely started a culture war in the 1960s and the 1970s. All right, we know the feminist movement was started by the CIA. I talked about this 3 years ago. All right, that the feminist movement was started by the CIA. And now we're seeing that these men's movements, the response to the feminist movements, were also started by the CIA. All right, this was the culture war that the United States government started in the 60s and 70s to get men and women at odds with each other. All right. And us as Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians, we fell right into it. All right. Us as Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians, we fell right into it. We fell right into the trap. All right. Counterculture. Like I said, there were two main themes. There were two main themes that's going to run through this whole men's movement, this whole response to the feminist movement. One was white supremacy and white nationalism, and the other was counterculture. All right, a counterculture is a culture whose values and norms of behavior differ substantially from those of mainstream society, sometimes diametrically opposed to mainstream cultural mores. This is what a counterculture is from Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And like I said, this comes out of the counterculture of the 60s and 70s, where this men's movement started, where these feminist movements started. All right, we already talked about how the father of this men's movement worked with the CIA, and we're going to talk about that influence in counterculture of the 60s and 70s. All right, prominent example of counterculture in the Western world includes counterculture of the 1960s. All right, that time period we're talking about. All right, this was a quote from CIA asset Timothy Leary. If you're not familiar with Timothy Leary, I would suggest you check it out. All right, it says, I give the CIA total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement and counterculture of the events of the 1960s. The CIA funded, supported, and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with LSD. And this is what sparked the counterculture and the culture war of the 1960s and 70s. It was a drug known as LSD. All right. All right. Few events have had more profound impact on the social and cultural upheavals of the 60s than the psychedelic revolution spawned by the spread of LSD. Now, we also talked about how not only the men's movements, all right, men's liberation movements, not only the feminist movement, but we also read how the conscious community, all right, and black revolutions, so-called black revolutions, also come out of this time period, all right, and it was all around the culture war and the counterculture started by the CIA and spread through a drug that they released to the public called LSD. And it's not too hard. It's not too far-fetched. It's not too far-fetched. We know that the government gave us crack in the 80s. We already proved that the government purposely sold us crack in the 80s, all right, to push their wars, to push their contras, to push their scandals, all right? In the intervening years since the drug discovery in 1943, the CIA had launched a massive covert research program in the hope that LSD would serve as an espionage weapon. Well, let's see what happened. All right, psychiatric pioneers came to believe that acid would shed light on the perplexing problem of mental illness, and a new generation of writers and artists have given birth to the LSD counterculture. All right, this was where the counterculture of the 60s comes from. This is where all the political upheaval of the 60s and 70s comes from. This is where all the black liberation movements comes from, the women's liberation movements, the sexual liberation, men's liberation. All of this comes from the drug culture, the drug counterculture of the 60s and 70s. And in comes a man named Harry Haywood. All right, in comes a man named Harry Haywood. Now, what's he responsible for? What's he responsible for? Well, first, he was from Omaha, Nebraska, supposedly. Moved to Chicago and in 1921 joined the African Blood Brotherhood, a propaganda arm of the Communist Party of America and political organization within Garvey's UNIA. Now, I thought that the CIA was opposed to communism. We're going to see how this man was able to move through different organizations in this counterculture of the 1960s. But he belonged to a propaganda arm of the Communist Party and Marcus Garvey's UNIA. All right, here's the logo. All right, here's the logo right here. Again, propaganda arm of the American Communist Party. And he worked with Garvey. And we all know that Garvey was a white supremacist. All right, Garvey was a white supremacist. All right, I did the drop on him with Walter Plecker already. All right, if you haven't seen it, check it out. But we know Marcus Garvey was a white supremacist, no different than the brother that led the Proud Boys was a white supremacist. All right, no different than Andrew Tate is a white supremacist. We already proved that tonight. But again, the CIA supposedly was against communism, but we're going to see how this communist, Harry Haywood, was allowed to move through these different organizations during this whole counterculture. All right, he was the founder of the Maoist New Communist Movement and had affiliations with the Students for a Democratic Society and the Black Panther Party. Now, the Students for a Democratic Society, they were mostly a white, hippie, peace-loving, hair grease, anti-Vietnam organization. All right, and we've all heard about the Black Panther Party. Now, the leader of the Students for a Democratic Society was a woman named Bernadine Dorn, and she's responsible for getting LSD out amongst all the activists. All right, she was the person that was used to spread this drug and create this counterculture. All right, this drug that the CIA let loose. All right, this woman is responsible for spreading it around all of these organizations amongst this counterculture and amongst all of these organizations in the 60s and 70s. All right, and she was under the tutelage of Harry Haywood, again, a man that worked with another known white supremacist in Marcus Garvey. And we're going to see the relationship between the Students for a Democratic Society, which again is mainly a white, hippie, weed smoking, anti-Vietnam movement, and we're going to see the relationship between them and the Black Panther Party. And again, Haywood moved through both of these organizations. All right, here's Bernadine Dorn, again, responsible for making drugs accessible, responsible for making LSD accessible to all of these conscious organizations, to all of these counterculture organizations, everything from the men's rights movements, the feminist movements, the Black Panthers, other Black nationalist organizations. This was the woman responsible for it. All right, September 1970, Bernadine Dorn announced that the Weatherman Underground, that's another white hippie movement, has had the honor and pleasure of helping Dr. Timothy Leary escape from a POW camp in California. She went on to intone that LSD will help us make a future where it will be possible to live in peace before concluding, now we are at war. All right, this woman is responsible for the spread of LSD that was unleashed by the CIA. And again, this is what spread to all of the people, all of the so-called activists in these counterculture movements. Again, like the men's liberation movement that we've been reading about so far tonight. All right, 1970, after helping Leary escape a California jail, the Brotherhood, another hippie organization, gave $25,000 to the Black Panthers, who in turn passed it down to the radical left-wing group, the Weather Underground, to smuggle Leary to Algeria and then to Afghanistan. Look, this is the relation between the Black Panther Party and these hippie organizations of the 1960s and 70s. Now, I'm sure there were people that were 10 toes down with this. All right, but 1960s counterculture was a CIA manufactured psyop conducted upon the public. All right, the 1960s counterculture was a CIA manufactured psyop conducted on the people. All right, and it influenced everything from the men's movement, the feminist movement, the hippie movements, the anti-war movement, the sexual liberation movement, the Black Panther Party, and other Black liberation movements. All right, all of this was a manufactured psyop played on the public. All right, these people just played in our faces all through the 60s and 70s. All through the 60s and 70s. All right, LSD played a pivotal role in the cultural upheavals that shook America in the 1960s and changed the country forever. Now, like I said, I know there were people that were 10 toes down. All right, I'm not saying that everybody in this time period was affected by it. All right, I'm not saying everybody was under the influence of these fake movements in the 60s and 70s. All right, these fake organizations in the 1960s and 70s. I know there were people that were 10 toes down. All right, like Fred Hampton. We know Fred Hampton was 10 toes down. How do we know? Because according to his son, the police religiously defaced this man's headstone. All right, the police department regularly shoot up Fred Hampton's tombstone. All right, they use Fred Hampton's tombstone for target practice. All right, that's how we know that Fred Hampton was 10 toes down. But he was around people whose mission was to serve white supremacy. Again, the theme through this whole men's movement was white supremacy and the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s. All right, Fred Hampton was 10 toes down. Fred Hampton was a warrior. But he was around people like this. All right, Eldridge Cleaver, the Black Panther who fell for Reagan. When former Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver endorsed the conservative Republican Ronald Reagan for re-election in 1984, seemed almost as absurd as Jesse Jackson embracing Donald Trump today. Did we read earlier that this whole men's movement was influenced by alt-right Republicans? Was influenced by far-right white nationalism and the counterculture? All right, Eldridge Cleaver wasn't it Ronald Reagan when he was governor in California? Wasn't he putting out the laws that was trying to take the Black Panthers' guns away? Wasn't Reagan, the same Reagan, when he was governor of California, putting laws together to take Black people's guns away back then? And again, he endorsed conservative Republican Ronald Reagan for re-election in 1984. All right, these are the people that we're talking about. All right, these are the people that we're talking about. People like Angela Davis. People like Angela Davis. All right, not only does her paternal lineage come from the Mayflower, that's already been proven, but she's LGBT. Wasn't that a part of the counterculture of the 60s and 70s? Didn't we read about how the men's movement was going to partner with the gay liberation movement? Did we read that? We read how the men's liberation movement was going to partner with the gay liberation movement. And now we have Angela Davis today, a member of the LGBT. All right, 80 to 83. Davis was married to Hilton Braithwaite. 1997, she came out as lesbian in an interview with Out Magazine. By 2020, Davis was living openly with her partner, the academic Gina Dent, a fellow humanities scholar and intersectional feminist researcher at UC Santa Cruz. All right, she's LGBT. All right, Angela Davis is LGBT and married to a woman who's a teacher or a scholar and researcher at UC Santa Cruz. And UC Santa Cruz also has a relationship with the CIA. You can look it up. All right, everything I've said tonight, you can research. Everything has been well sourced up. And we're also dealing with, we talked about Black Lives Matter earlier and how the counterculture of the 60s and 70s influenced all of these organizations, all of these fake organizations in the 60s and 70s. So now we have today In modern times, all right, you see Cori Bush, all right, Black Lives Matter. Look at all the white tea folks behind her. Look at all the white tea folks behind her. All right, Black Lives Matter. She goes from Black Lives Matter leader to the House of Representatives. You go from Black Lives Matter activist to becoming the state's first Black woman to represent the state in Congress. All right, how can you be an enemy of the establishment when you have the same philosophy as the establishment? And that's a question for anybody watching. That's a question for anybody watching. How can you be an enemy of the establishment when you have the same philosophy as the establishment? All right, let that marinate for a minute. Let that marinate for a minute. All right, let's drop that. Let's get into the Bible. All right, before we end it, let's get into the Bible. We're going to start with the book of Psalms, chapter 83, verse 3. They had taken crafty counsel against thy people and have consulted against thy hidden ones. And that's absolutely what we've been talking about this whole night, this whole class. These people are taking crafty counsel against thy people. All right, people in some so-called manosphere, whatever the fuck that means. Some so-called high-value men. All right, our enemies have taken crafty counsel against us. Crafty counsel against Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians, the Lord's chosen people, the chosen people of God, the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. We already read how the CIA created this entire counterculture of the 60s and 70s, which influenced and gave birth to the modern manosphere today. All right, the modern red pill movement today. All right, our enemy is taking crafty counsel against us. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Colossians. Book of Colossians, chapter 2, verse 8. Colossians chapter 2, verse 8. All right, it says, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy in vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. All right, the Bible says, beware lest any man spoil you. To be spoiled is to be ruined. Just think about when milk spoils. All right, to be spoiled is to be ruined. All right, so to be ruined through philosophy and vain deceit. All right, and that's all this men's movement is. That's all this red pill talk, all of this so-called high value man talk. Isn't Diddy a so-called high value man? Ain't they talking about throwing him under the jail? All right. All of this talk, this manosphere, this high value man talk is nothing but philosophy and vain deceit. All right, philosophy and vain deceit. The word vain means useless. All right, this is absolutely useless deceit. After the tradition of men, and we read about the tradition of the men it came from. We read about a man named Asa Baber, a man whose woman left him, took everything, right? Was worked with Playboy, because that's the closest he can get to a woman, was a damn men's magazine. And this is who gave birth to this men's rights movement. These are the kind of men that we want to take advice from. Men that used to get their lunch money took when they was kids. Men who used to get shoved in their lockers when they was kids. All right, these are the traditions of men. All right, after the rudiments of the world and not after Christ. All right, and not after Christ. Like I said, if y'all want to get some real masculinity, man, turn into ISUPK, all right, on any platform. We're in every major city. We're in several countries around the world, all right, under Commander General Yohana, if you want to learn about some real damn masculinity. All right, last scripture. Last scripture. We're going to go to the book of Mark, chapter 3, verse 27. Mark chapter 3, verse 27. It says, no man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind a strong man, then he will spoil his house. All right. Nobody can enter into a strong man's house. All right. You're not going to be able to be invaded. Your household isn't going to be able to be taken over by these philosophies in the world. All right. Your household is not going to be able to be taken over by feminism. Your household is not going to be able to be taken over by some red pill manosphere movement. All right. A bunch of weak men that can't lock women down. All right. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods. All right. Your household is not going to be spoiled by these philosophies if you're actually a strong man. If you're actually a masculine man that follows Christ. All right. Actual masculine man that follows the laws, statutes, and commandments. All right. Again, if you want to learn real masculinity, all right, tune into ISUPK in every major city under Commander General Rihanna if you want to learn what real masculinity is. All right, so we'll drop that. We'll go ahead and end it. All right, again, tune in. All right, week-long content, ISUPK Kentucky, Monday night history class, Tuesday night brotherhood class, Wednesday law class, Wednesday night the podcast. All right, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., Cry Out, Spare Not podcast. All right, this has been Officer 500, Howard Moore, ISUPK Kentucky. With that, we'll do one courtesy salute. Shalom. Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai Barakathon. Yahweh Shemalathon Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai.